The Subbuteo Hospital by Joseph Darlington. I remember playing Subbuteo on my own beneath our dining room table. The dining room was huge and dark. Heavy maroon-coloured wood was everywhere. The floors, the furniture, even in my memory running in planks up the walls, although I don't think that's right. My childhood is haunted by big, dark dining rooms like this one. Everyone seemed to have these rooms with giant tables in them. Rooms that constantly stood empty. I made a habit of playing in them. They were used so rarely that I reckon most adults forgot they even had them. As long as you kept it quiet, you could play in there all day without anybody coming in to bother you. I had a lot of different games. Subbuteo wasn't one of my favourites, but I liked the little men stood on the round bases a lot, and so every once in a while I'd have a go. I never knew the rules to Subbuteo, and to this day I still don't. I imagine the official rules would have made more sense if you were into football, but I wasn't. I was far more aware of it then, though. Football was the common mythology of the schoolyard. I recognised Alan Shearer and Kevin Keegan, though for some reason I thought they were the same person. I even, thinking back, had a Premier League '97 sticker collection. I don't know why I did. I didn't know any of the footballers in it. I just liked to collect. Slowly amassing enough stickers to fill all the gaps in the book gave me a sense of satisfaction, as if one small part of the universe was growing more orderly and complete through my efforts. If I'd have ever completed that book, I'd very likely have thrown it out and moved on to the next thing. As it was, I saw a friend's near-complete collection one day and realised the futility of the exercise. I gave up collecting them that day. I never did get an Alan Shearer, nor a Kevin Keegan neither. If I did, perhaps I'd have been able to work out that they were two different people. My Subbuteo players weren't named after footballers. They had the names of people from my school. I think a couple also had the names of American NHL players. I had an NHL video game, and names like Wayne Gretzky and Steve Yzerman had a great ring to them. I liked Wolverhampton Wanderers, the Wolves, and Accrington Stanley for the same reason. They had a good ring. So I made team lists and a Championship Cup knockout table and proceeded to play Subbuteo against myself. Not knowing the rules, I took a lot of liberties. I tried to flick the players like the boys on the box were doing, but they would fly off in a random direction. More often I'd make them walk along and then kick the ball, a ball I'd roll along or make fly through the air in a more appropriate direction, carrying it in my fingers. Sometimes the other team would run up and try to tackle the man with the ball. This took a lot of dexterity, as one hand would have to control both attacking player and ball, while the other would move one or more of the defenders. Luckily, if I dropped one, or if it didn't work out the right way, I could always pause time and do an instant replay. Things always went correctly after an instant replay, and sometimes they did so in slow motion. On TV, I'd wonder what the real players were doing when the instant replay was on. I figured they must all be standing still on the pitch, waiting for the ref to tell them when the replay was over so they could keep on playing. I can't remember how far we were into the Championship playoffs before the first injury occurred. I don't think it was very far. I must have been getting bored of moving the players around manually as I had returned to flicking, and one of the flicks sent a player barrelling into a succession of other players. I got my notepad out. George Brown, 5 minutes in the sin bin for crashing into other players. Then, on a different notepad, I decided to write down the injuries suffered by the victims of George Brown. Neil Wallace, broken ankle. Wayne Gretzky, stubbed toe. Michael Jackson, 3 broken ribs and a bruised knee. I enjoyed adding these details. There was something about the injuries, the range of different ones available, the interesting words I could use in describing them that appealed to me. As the game continued, the wounded started piling up. I would invent reasons for players to go insane with rage and go on rampages. I would flick them at each other, listing the various injuries received and the minutes accrued in the sin bin by the violent players. Sometimes a player would make the noble decision that it was better to sacrifice themselves for the sake of the team, and so would do a flying kick into the goalie just as the ball approached. They would get a 2-match ban, but as the goalie would be off the pitch for the next 10 minutes getting eye surgery, that would leave the goal open for the other players to swoop in. The injuries soon got out of hand. I had long lists of the injured, and it was taking them far longer to recover than it was taking their attackers to get off the bench. I decided to ration the number of minor injuries, making sure that there were never more than 10 or 12 for every major one. There was also the potential to send wounded players back on the pitch. I had one Subbuteo figure who had been stepped on and had snapped off his base at the ankles. You could still move the base around like normal, but you had to lean the snapped body of the footballer against it when you were done flicking. This unfortunate player came to represent the walking wounded. Many was the time when, all seeming lost for the Wolves, Wayne Gretzky would limp out, a bloody bandage still wrapped around his head from a cracked skull, and, to the astonishment of the crowd, he would score the winning goal, heading it in off his injury, blood flying everywhere. Gretzky would not know of his victory, as the header would put him in a coma for 4 weeks, but when he woke up, he would get a medal and be interviewed on TV. I suppose, now I think of it, that this strange pastime grew out of my own hospitalizations as a child. When I was born, the doctor's forceps grabbed my eye and pulled me out by the socket. It damaged the muscles around my eye, and it was presumed that I would go blind. I didn't, but it took a lot of surgeries to get my eyelid to work again. When it did open, it opened lazily, and as my good eye had now got used to working alone, my brain didn't use the damaged eye to see anymore. It had vision, but my brain chose not to use it. As a result, I had no depth perception. I still don't. Having no depth perception, I can't catch. I'm therefore terrible at any game involving a ball, and when you think about it, that's about 90% of them. And it wasn't that I wasn't sporty. Despite being picked last for football, rugby, tennis, rounders, cricket, etc., I was still the school high jump champion, out-jumping people a foot taller than me. I was on the swimming team, and I was always in the top 2 or 3 at long-distance running. I remember there were a lot of very sick children in those children's wards. When I went in and out for my eye surgeries, I'd see children with no hair, with tubes in their noses and ears and eyes. I'd see some with strange hands and limbs, unusual faces, some with gaps where skin ought to be. You weren't supposed to ask about who had what illness. That just made you wonder more. There is a tremendous variety of things that can go wrong with the human body. I learned this very young, along with an in-depth knowledge of anatomy. There were always anatomy posters up in the walls, and with nothing better to do, I spent long hours studying them. Some of those children I met will never have left that ward. I left with an advanced knowledge of body parts, their functions, and their many possible failures. I don't think I ever built a hospital for the injured Subbuteo players. I think they just went back in the box for a while. Sometimes they'd get lost, somewhere in that huge, dark dining room, only to turn up weeks later. The worst thing that could happen was somebody coming in and trying to join the game. I knew there was something shameful about that long list of injuries. I was also vaguely aware that I wasn't playing the game correctly, and that this might in itself be a cause for punishment. That's why I always played Subbuteo in the dining room, back in those long, long days without anybody else around.